Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Shalom AZ Ministries, House of New Beginnings. If you're joining us for the first time, we'd love to connect. Just drop a note in the chat and tell us where you're watching from. When we gather together each day and each week, our heart's desire is to truly encounter the presence of the King of the universe. Our desire is to meet with Him and to be transformed into the likeness of His character in ever-increasing measure. We want to be like Him and to be transformed so that we can be transformative in the places where He has planted us, that we would be water bottles in the desert, overflowing with the life and refreshing newness that He is pouring into us. Today, as we gather in Yeshua's name, let's remember He's here with us. He sees you, He knows you, and He's working in your life to shape you into His likeness so you can radiate His love wherever you are. Mark your calendars for our next gathering on Saturday, August 16th at 5 p.m. at the Chapel of Nelson University, AIC in Phoenix, where we'll worship together, connect as a community, and close out Shabbat with a beautiful evening of encouragement and shared life. We'll also enjoy a potluck dinner, so please bring a dish or dessert if you're able. If you would, let us know you're coming by registering at shalomaz.com/gather or by scanning the QR code on the screen. It's not required, but it helps us prepare. Of course, if you decide to come last minute, you're still more than welcome. Whether you've been a part of the community for years or this would be your very first time, we'd love to see you there. In addition to joining us for Daily Manna each day at 10 a.m., we hope you're able to join us for Shabbat service on Saturday at 10:30 Arizona time. Our Torah portion this week is Numbers 33, verse 1 through Numbers 36, verse 13. Our Haftarah portion is Jeremiah 2, verses 4 through 28, and Jeremiah 3, verse 4. Our New Covenant reading is James or Jacob 4, verses 1 through 12. Please download our Shalom AZ app on your phone or streaming device. It's the easiest way to watch services, access devotionals, and share teachings with friends. Just search Shalom AZ in your app store. We want to say thank you to everyone who gives so faithfully. Your generosity is an act of worship to the Lord, and it makes it possible for us to share Yeshua and the richness of His Word with our community and beyond. We couldn't do this without you. As you give, you're not only meeting needs, you're partnering with the Lord to bring life and transformation to countless hearts. We are grateful that as you give to Him, you are entrusting Shalom AZ Ministries to be the faithful stewards of your worship and giving. The easiest way to give is through our app or online at shalomaz.com/give. You can also mail a check to our P.O. Box. As we dive into the Word today, we want to remind you that each daily manna teaching comes with a companion devotional guide. This guide is designed to help you go deeper beyond the live stream, whether in your own personal devotion time or as a resource to help you in ministering to others. You can use it in so many ways, for daily reflection and journaling, as a family devotional around the dinner table, or even to start a simple Bible study during your lunch break with coworkers you're ministering to. No matter how you use it, these devotionals are meant to help you not just hear the Word, but to live it out and share it with others. If the Holy Spirit has put someone on your heart, a neighbor, a friend, a relative, this can be an easy way to invite them into a conversation about Yeshua in a natural, approachable way. You can download today's companion devotional right from our app or our website at shalomaz.com. Thanks for being here. Let's let Yeshua have His way in us today.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday morning, July the 31st, 2025, And we are now continuing in our Torah portions this week. Now, I made a little bit of a mistake last week on the weekend and at the beginning of this week in saying that this week's Torah portion was Maseh, which was the last couple chapters of Numbers, because most years, Matot and Maseh are combined, two Torah portions in 1 week. That's almost always the case. Those two usually go together. So last week should have been Matot Maseh, and then this week is Devarim. And for some reason, I had been under the misapprehension that this week was Maseh, when last week was Matot Maseh. Anyway, not a huge deal, but want to remind everyone, as you see on the screen, that we have a gathering that's going to be coming up in 2 weeks, August the 16th, little over 2 weeks, August the 16th at 5 p.m. at Nelson University AIC, and hope that you're able to join us there. And just want to remind everyone about that. All right, so we are continuing in our Torah portions, and again, this week is Devarim. The title of today's Daily Manna is A Covenant That Outlives Our Failures. A covenant that outlives our failures. And we're going to, in large part, the Torah portion this week is Deuteronomy 1 through 3:22. Mostly what we're going to do, and we're going to kind of overview the entirety of that. And in fact, we're going to initially kind of approach Devarim, or Deuteronomy. Now we're entering into the 5th book of the Torah. We're on the home stretch of the Torah, and so we are heading toward that closing end. We're in the book, and we're going to get an overview of even the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. Why do we call it Deuteronomy? The word is Devarim. Devarim means words, right? It means words. And so we read in Deuteronomy 1:1, right? These are the words, Ele HaDevarim. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness, across the Jordan. To all Israel across the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Lavan, Hazarot, and Di Zahav. So this is where we're at. So if it's Devarim, why do we call it Deuteronomy? The sages originally called the book the Mishnah Torah, which means a second law. So second Torah. So that's where we would get in the Greek then Deuteronomos. So when they translated the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, into Greek in the Septuagint, then it was Deuteronomos, second law, Deuteronomy. So that's where we get that. That's where we get the name Deuteronomy. So what makes this book a second law? Why is it called the second law? Because it's true, some of the laws that we're going to read in Deuteronomy we have read before. We will see the 10 Commandments again, which we read in Exodus 20. They appear here again as Moses declares them now to a new generation, right? To those who will go where their fathers were supposed to have gone. So there's repetition. And then there's basically, Deuteronomy is basically one sermon. It's a month-long sermon series. It's not all done in one day, but it's a month-long sermon series from Moses that he delivers in this final month of his life before this next generation crosses the Jordan to enter the promised land. And in fact, the opening verses of Deuteronomy, having walked through this, there's a tragedy to, particularly to verse 2. We just read verse 1. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Lavan, Hazarot, and Di Zahav. Verse 2. It's 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of the mountain of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. It's 11 days journey. So when you read Horeb there, right? When you read Horeb, that is Mount Sinai. So the journey from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea was just an 11-day journey. Of course, Kadesh Barnea was where they were when they sent the 12 spies to check out the land. So they had remained at Sinai for a year and a couple of months. It took 2 months to get from Egypt to Sinai. And then they were there at Sinai for a year and a couple of months as the Lord was preparing them, giving them the Torah, giving them instructions, right? Instructions about, first of all, how to love the Lord your God, how to draw near to him, how to love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And secondly, how to interact with one another, how the society that you're going to be, that God is building in you, that you're going to be in partnership with the Lord as he has called you out, set you apart. Now he's going to build in you as you walk in his ways, a society where you love your neighbor as yourself, where there is a level of righteousness and justice in our dealings with one another, that if we would obey the way of the Lord, that the nations would come streaming. We would be a light on a mountaintop to the rest of the world about how God intended things to be. But from Egypt to Kadesh Barnea would have been 2 months plus a little bit. It would have been plus the 11 days here would have been about 70 days, give or take, right? This is the 70 days that we're now in the end of the 40th year since leaving Egypt. That's the tragedy of it, right? We're actually, what we see in verse 3 here is we're now in the 11th month of the 40th year. In verse 3, now Moses spoke to Bnei Israel according to all Adonai had commanded him for them. In the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, right? So I don't want to necessarily bore you with a timeline. I'm not trying to get overly academic with a timeline, and yet the scripture gives us some of these specific dates that can kind of give us the pattern, give us the timeline that we're looking for. And so we're going to just take a brief glance at that, at a little bit of a timeline here. So right now it's the first day of the 11th month, and you're in the 40th year. Now that doesn't mean 40 years plus 11 months, right? Because sometimes the way that we as Americans say our birthdays, like if I say to you, I'm 50 years old, right? So, and I turned 50 last month, about a month and a half ago. So if I were to say to you, I'm a month and a half into my 50th year, that would sound normal to you. You would think, oh, he's 50 and he just began being 50 a month and a half ago. That's the way we say it. But in fact, I'm a month and a half into my 51st year, right? I've begun my 51st year. Like when I was a month and a half years old, I was in my first year of life, but I hadn't concluded it. At the end of my first year, we said, boom, he's one. And then I began my second year. That's the way it's being counted here. So it's the 11th month, the month of Shavat, and the first day of the 11th month, the first day of Shavat in the 40th year. So not concluded 40 years. We're about to conclude. We're in the 11th month, about to conclude 40 years. And a month in the ancient Hebrew calendar, a month in the Hebrew calendar is 30 days. A year was 360 days. And then every so often you would have a 13th month to make up for all those 5 days that you missed. So we have that part here, beginning of Deuteronomy. It's the first day of Shavat. It's the first day of the 11th month. And then jump ahead to Joshua 4:19. It says, now the people came up from the Jordan. So they had gone, the rocks had been put. They had walked across the Jordan and then came up to the other side. So now they're in the land, They came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. So the date at this point, it's the 10th day of the first month. Now we've gone into the 41st year. We were at the 11th month in the 40th year. We're now in the first month. It's a new year, and it's the 10th day. This is the 10th of Nisan, right? So it's been exactly 40 years now since our fathers, literal fathers, were in Egypt and selected that lamb for that first Passover, right? You'll remember in Exodus 12, it says, "This month is to be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, first month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one lamb for the household." So now this is the 40th anniversary of having taken that lamb. We've now crossed in to the land. We're on the eastern border of Jericho, just on the other side of the Jordan. So we were in the 11th month. The month of Shavat is 30 days. The 12th month, which wasn't mentioned, but you had to go through the 12th to get to the first, is another 30 days, the month of Adar. And then we're 10 days into Nisan. So there's about 70 days, right? 30 plus 10, about 70 days from the time Moses begins in Deuteronomy to when the people enter into the land. Now, at the end of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 34, Moses dies. Jewish tradition says that Moses died on the 7th day of Adar, which would be the 7th day of the 12th month, right? And the math adds up, actually. And you'll see here, the time from the beginning of his message here in Deuteronomy to when he dies is 37 days. We read in Deuteronomy 34, it says, "So Moses, the servant of Adonai, died there in the land of Moab, as was from the mouth of Adonai. And then he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows of his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his vigor gone." So he didn't get tired out. He didn't wear himself out preaching. He might have been preaching up until that last day. He may have finished and then gone and died. And then after he died, it says, "Then the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping, mourning for Moses were ended." So if you go from the 7th of Adar, 30 days, if he died the 7th of Adar, you go 30 days. Now it's the 7th of Nisan. Now it's the 7th day of the first month. You following me here? And so and what we read in Joshua chapter 1, says, "Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of Adonai, that Adonai spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, saying, 'My servant Moses is dead. So now arise, you and all these people, cross over this Jordan to the land that I am giving them to Bnei Israel.'" Verse 10, "Then Joshua commanded the officials of the people, saying, 'Go through the camp and charge the people, saying, prepare provisions for within 3 days.'" So it's the 7th of Nisan. He says, "Within 3 days, you will be crossing over this Jordan to go in to possess the land which Adonai your God is giving you to possess it." And then we also see in Joshua chapter 3, "Then Joshua rose up early in the morning, and he and all the children of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan. They lodged there before crossing over." Now it came about after 3 days that the officials went through the camp. And then, of course, so you have that. Now, if you go that 37 days to the 7th of Adar, when tradition says that he died, which again, because of this 3 days, that adds up. It's from the 7th to the 7th of Nisan. Now you have the 3 days before crossing over. Then again, Joshua 4:19. "Now the people came from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho." Right, and so that gives us this sort of time frame of how long. So the book of Deuteronomy is going to be a 37-day sermon series from Moses, around that, a month-long sermon series with some Shabbats in there. And I personally think that whenever we're able to gather accuracy regarding things like timelines, to give ourselves as accurate as possible of the historical context as we're able, I think that's always to our benefit. So when the scripture's giving us dates, when we're going through this, it's good to be able to stop and kind of take a look and see what, get the bigger picture, the wider picture, the historical framework of what we're looking at. I think over the long run, that can only be beneficial. So now Moses he's speaking in Deuteronomy, in this Mishneh Torah, second law, Devarim. He's speaking words to the children and the grandchildren of the Exodus generation. And I mean, some of the adults, the young adults, are your grandchildren of the Exodus generation. You think about it, everyone under 40, I mean, if you're 39 years old, you've only been in the wilderness. You've never lived in Egypt, right? If you're 39 years old, you've been eating manna your whole life. If you're 40 years old, you've been eating manna your whole life, drinking miraculous water from the rock their whole lives, this rock that was with them, giving them water in the desert. Anyone under 40 wouldn't remember Sinai, right? A 40-year-old would have been, that had maybe just left, had been there, had been an infant, his mother carrying him through the Red Sea, her mother carrying her through the Red Sea. 40-year-old would have been a baby or a toddler a year and a half in at Sinai at most. So even if they were there at the giving of the covenant, they don't remember. They don't remember the thundering of Exodus 20. We read in Exodus 24, verse 4, says, so Moses wrote down all the words of Adonai, then rose up early in the morning and built an altar below the mountain along with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He then sent out young men of the children of Israel who sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings of oxen to Adonai. Then Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and the other half he poured out against the altar. He took the scroll of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. And again, they said, all that Adonai has spoken, we will do and obey. Then Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant, which Adonai has cut with you in agreement with all these words. Right? So when that happened 40 years ago, 38 years ago, 39 really. I mean, it's almost the full 40 because he gave them the Torah, we're 40 days into their time at Mount Sinai. And so is when they got the 10 Commandments, they got and the 40 days after, and it's really 80 days after because Moses had to go back up. But this is before the golden calf situation. So anyway, if you were 39 or 40, if you're 39, you weren't there for this, and you certainly, if you're 40, you don't remember it. If you're 50, you were 50 years old. If I'm there at 50, I lived this whole life. This is like 1985 to me, 40 years ago. This is a long time ago. I remember being 10, and of course, being at Mount Sinai would have left an imprint on a 10-year-old, but it was a long time ago. So now, this is the generation that's going into the land. And so Moses is giving them the covenant instructions again. Not all the laws are read here in Deuteronomy. And that's the thing about Deuteronomy, about Mishneh Torah, second Torah. It's not a repetition, as it were, of all the laws and all the history. So it's like, what is Deuteronomy? Right? Because if it's just a telling of the history of Israel, I mean, we do know that it's this sermon series, as it were, because Moses is like, you guys don't mess up the way your fathers did. You got to do this right. And he wants to get this across to them. But if this were simply a history, then the book would have moved from the Torah would move from the end of Numbers to Moses' death to Joshua, to the crossing over the Jordan. You say, well, is this just a book of laws? Well, it is a book with laws in it. But it would look a lot more like Leviticus if it would only mostly contain laws. It does contain many laws, but they're about half of the book. So the question has been for scholars, like, what is the function of this book? Why is Deuteronomy here? Why does it have this particular structure? And I'll just tell you the short of it. The short answer is Deuteronomy is the covenant agreement, the contract, so to speak. Understanding essentially that covenant is an agreement. When we think of the word covenant, we use it generally, first and foremost, we use it in spiritual language. Even relationally, we use it in a spiritual way when we talk about we're in covenant. There's an agreement here. There's an agreement. But I think it's important to understand that in the ancient world, covenants were agreements that were part of a secular thing. They were peace treaties. They were peace treaties between nations, between nation states. Okay, how are we going to function together? And so often a covenant, a peace treaty would be a treaty between states that had roughly equivalent power. You know, not one is not stronger than the other. We're going to kind of be there for each other, help each other out. Those were called parity treaties. You know, we're about the same. But there were also covenants that would be between states with radically different levels of power, right? So one is very powerful, one is weak, and the weak one needs the big one. And so there's got to be some benefit for the big one to be in covenant with this small state or this small nation. And so that would be called a suzerain vassal treaty. Sorry about the spelling there. But on different levels, I spelled it like different strokes basically, but different levels of power, they were suzerain vassal treaties. And so archaeologists have discovered a number of in museums around the world, they have treaties from the ancient Near East that were from this area during this period of time, around 3000 BCE, this time in ancient Near Eastern history. And what they've discovered more or less is that all of these treaties had the same structure. So let's just go through this real quick. So each treaty had a preamble. They begin with a preamble, which is like, okay, well, who is the person initiating the treaty? Who is speaking? It establishes the identity of the power that is initiating this covenant. Following that preamble, it would be followed by a historical review. Here's kind of what has led us up. Here's the historical recap. Here's what's led us up, the history of the relationship between the two parties of the covenant, what's brought us here to this moment. So here's who's initiating it. Here's how we got here, why we're here. And then third would be the stipulations. These are the provisions of the covenant, general principles, detailed provisions. Following that was the deposition or the depositing, the storing of the covenant. Where is the covenant going to be stored, deposited in a set apart place, in a special place, and it's to be reviewed on a regular basis. So we all know what this is about. We all know what the covenant is about. We all know what is expected of us. And so that's followed by the impact of covenant. If we keep the covenant, here are the benefits. Here are the benefits of adhering to this agreement. If we violate the covenant, here are the consequences of violating the agreement. Blessings and curses. And then the contract ends, right? The treaty ends with acknowledgement of witnesses, those who stand as witnesses to this agreement. and there would be witnesses from the leadership of the nations, but it would also usually appeal to the gods of those nations, right? The gods of those nations, which they would appeal to them. So the nations themselves were not in covenant with their gods, but their gods served as witnesses, and they would be the ones who would, stand as witnesses against the covenant. So when you look at Deuteronomy, right? So when you look at Deuteronomy has this kind of structure. You have the Deuteronomy 1, the first 5 verses, announces the place and the time and the person initiating the covenant that follows. Here, it's Moses on Adonai's behalf. Then, Moses is on Adonai's behalf. Then we have the historical review. So that goes from verse 6 of chapter 1 through the end of chapter 4. So now that's what we'll look at, why we're going to do an overview today, because we're going to be looking at the history that we've just gone through in Numbers, in particular, in Exodus and Numbers. Moses reminds them. He rehearses the history that has brought the people to where they are. This is why we're here. This is how we got to this place. That's followed by the stipulations. And so the first portion of that is from Deuteronomy 5 through 11. Those are general provisions. So we see the 10 Commandments again. That's where we have the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4, and then the events around the making of the covenant at Sinai. And then following that are then more specific laws, details of the law from chapters 12 through 26. That are how we're to carry these things out throughout the land of Israel. And then then there's the depositing, the storing of the covenant. We see in Deuteronomy 27, the law is to be inscribed on stone at Mount Ebal. And then in Deuteronomy 31, the Torah is written by Moses, will be placed in the ark to be read in the public by the king. If there's a king, it says at a national assembly held every 7 years. And so when you read about what the king is supposed to do, the king will be writing that covenant. The king is supposed to be going through the Torah and writing it. And we'll see that as we go through Deuteronomy. And so it would be closely familiar with him. And then it's to be conveyed to the people every 7th year, right? Every Shemitah. Every year of rest, it's going to be happening, and we're going to remember what God has called us to do. Then that followed by the cursings and blessings, which we're familiar with. And in chapter 28 are the blessings, is the first 14 verses, and then there's 3 times that of the curses through the rest of 28. The consequences of violating. So you have the blessings, then the curses, the consequences of violating the agreement. And then Deuteronomy 29 and 30 is the actual covenant renewal together with a statement that even if the people break the covenant and the curses come to pass and you're in exile and the things are laid out with great specificity that come to pass, that even then, that if there can be renewal, return is possible, right? That there's a way that God's going to make a way for return, for repentance. And then finally, we see Deuteronomy with the witnesses. The Lord says, right, he himself does, because he is part of the agreement, which is again radical. This is not like the other nations. The other nations are not in covenant with their God. With their gods. They are not in covenant with their gods. Those gods have not bound themselves. Covenant, you bind yourself to one another. So what's remarkable here is that the God of Israel binds himself to his people, expresses his overt commitment to them in the most powerful of ways, has demonstrated that. And so he calls as witness the heavens and the earth. And there's a song at the end in Deuteronomy 31:19, this song that serves as a witness, Moses says. So that gives you, so what we've got then with Deuteronomy is like the marriage contract in Israel. We have the ketuvah, the ketubah, which is when here's what the groom has said he will do. Here's how he will provide for his bride, and we see this treaty, as it were, this covenant that God has initiated. This is a suzerain treaty because the Lord of the universe is in covenant with a nation that had been enslaved, right? And so that the Lord would tie himself to them. He chose them with purpose, chose Israel with purpose, made a covenant with purpose. The gods, the demonic powers in the other nations would not do that. They would use the people. They would allow the people to bind themselves to them, but they wouldn't commit themselves to the people. They could do whatever they wanted, because while we know that that the little g, the things that this world worships, while the stones themselves they worship are just empty, what those stones represent, the spiritual entities that are at work, because our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in high places. Those demonic entities are at work, but they are not driven by love or concern or care or anything good, but they are to steal, kill, and destroy. But now the Lord, the God of Israel, has made covenant with his people. He's done it with purpose. He's taken an entire nation to be his partners in this work of recreation, right? That they are, by obeying him, to be building a society that reflects what life should look like, the life that God intends. That's what the kingdom of God should demonstrate, the life that God intends, as they are in obedience to the Lord. If they'll walk in his ways, right? This is the purpose of God, to show what life was supposed to look like. And so this book is a copy of the covenant between God and the people, made at Sinai, renewed again on the bank of the Jordan, right? And so now it's being renewed. We got it 40 years ago, but now it's being renewed for a new generation. The first generation, other than two, they died in the desert. But now this generation gets to cross over. So we'll look briefly. I know that's a big overview, as it were, and very introductory. And I know there's an academic nature of what we've just looked at, but it does point so much to the heart of God. And I think it's important for us to grasp this reality about the heart of God. But let's look here at the opening of Deuteronomy. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan. By the way, just a reminder, one of the things I think is so amazing is that word across, it means over, is the word aver, which is where we get the word ivrit, Hebrew. The word Hebrew means from over there, across the river. And so God's people have always been outsiders. Their identity, because we're his, we're not of this place, we're from over there. Right? And that is the nature of it's reflective of really how we're supposed to be in a world that is so self-centered, that we are supposed to reflect something that's from over there. That's what Hebrew really literally means. So these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel over the river, over the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between the Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Di Zahav. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Now Moses spoke to Bnei Israel according to all Adonai had commanded him for them, in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, after he had struck down Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, king of the Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. across the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this Torah, saying, so now begins the history, right? Adonai our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn, journey on, and enter the hill country of the Amorites and all their neighbors in the Arabah, the hill country, the lowland, the Negev, and by the seashore, the land of the Canaanites and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Enter and possess the land that Adonai swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them. And so now, if I were to go through verse by verse, if we were to read through, which I encourage you to do, to rehearse this history, to go through the rest of this week's Torah portion and into the beginning of next week's Torah portion, through chapter 4, it's the historical review portion of the covenant. Moses reminds them in verses 9 through 18 of chapter 1 how he appointed judges to help carry the burden of the people. And then from verses 19 to 33, he recalls why they're still in the desert, the sin of the spies and Israel's rebellion. And then verses 34 to 40 recall God's judgment on their fathers, on that generation. Don't forget, this is why we're still here. They could have been celebrating their 40th Passover in the land. They're about to celebrate their first in a couple of days. It's the 10th of the 10th of Nisan. On the 14th of Nisan, they're about to have their first Passover in the land. The Lord had declared that none of the generation would enter the land except Caleb and Joshua. Moses himself would not enter due to his later disobedience. And talks about how Joshua was chosen to lead the children that they were the reason that generation was afraid. What's going to happen to our children? These people are so big. Well, your children are the ones that are now inheriting the land. That's you guys, Moses is saying. He's reminding them, don't be afraid. Don't do what your fathers did. The last verses of chapter 1 recall that then the futile attempt to go ahead and take the land. The people tried to go up without God's blessing, and they were defeated by the Amorites at that time. And so they remained there for a long time. Chapter 2 then takes us then on the wilderness journey. Chapter 2 and into chapter 3, the victory over the kings. God instructed them, don't fight Edom, don't fight Moab, don't fight Ammon, because these lands were given to the descendants of Esau and Lot, right? And so just pass peacefully through there, purchase food and water. You don't get to take from their inheritance. But God commanded Israel to begin taking possession of Amorite territory. And when Sihon refused passage, Israel defeated Sihon and took all the cities. And that's when it kind of freaked Balak out. But the chapter doesn't talk about that. Chapter 3 recalls how they defeated Og, king of Bashan, and then the land was distributed east of the Jordan, right? So the land east of the Jordan was given to the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. And then so at the end of this portion of chapter 3, Moses reminds those of Reuben and the Gadites and the Manassites that their warriors have to cross the Jordan to help their brothers take the land. And Joseph is then charged to lead. Not to fear, we read the end of this week's Torah portion that says, I commanded Joshua at that time, Moses says, your eyes have seen all that Adonai your God has done to these two kings. Adonai will do the same to all the kingdoms you are about to cross into. You must not fear them, for it is Adonai your God who fights for you. All right, so he wants Joshua. It's incumbent upon you, Joshua, when you look at them, you don't fear them because you're not fighting them. This isn't about your strength, right? This is about his strength. Don't lose sight of that. Don't take your eyes off of him. That's the heart of this. You must not be afraid because he's the one fighting for you. You've got to trust him. It's hard to put into words when you read all of this, when knowing what's yet to come, the kindness of the Lord, the long suffering of the Lord, his slow to angerness. He says, hear the Lord. Hear the Lord. He stoops down and he lowers himself to us in our weakness. And on one level, he pleads with us to trust him. Hey, you're mine, he says. I've got you, so trust me. Don't be afraid. He says, when you're afraid, what you're saying is you fear them more than you trust me. And yet the most natural thing for us to do is fear, but in those moments, except they've seen who he is. They've seen what he can do. Their faith should be built he tells them, during all this time, he'll later tell them that your shoes didn't wear out. You've been eating and drinking with manna from heaven and water from a rock. Like, the Lord has shown his power. Trust him. And yet his people continually don't trust him. Let's go back to Egypt. And yet because God so loves the world, he continues to stay true to his promises, to his purposes when his people violate his covenant. Even at the moments where he's going to start over with Moses a couple of times, he still responds to Moses' intercession for the people. And he stays true to his promises, the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That he's going to do it. He's going to keep working to make all things new. He doesn't impose his will on Israel. And so this generation died in the desert. So now the next generation has an opportunity. Will this generation be the one? Will this generation be the one that follows him? When you look at the history of his promises of his covenant, we see in just quickly moving through them here. He tells Abraham, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant in order to be your God and your seed's God after you. I want to be your God. I'm binding myself to you, he says. I will give to you and to your seed after you the land where you are an outsider, the whole land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So that promise to Abraham, that's what's happening right now. That's where they're at. It looked bad. It looked bad when they were in Egypt, but God hadn't forgotten, right? God heard their sobbing. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw Bnei Israel and was concerned about them, right? When it says he remembered them, it was time. It became on the forefront of what he was about to do. He tells them, he sends the message through Moses to remind his people, to assure them. He says, I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage where they journeyed. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the children of Israel whom the Egyptians are keeping in bondage. So I have remembered my covenant. He hasn't forgotten. Even when you're in slavery and you think he's forgotten, he hasn't forgotten his promises. His timing may be different than yours, but he hasn't forgotten his promises. And he tells Moses, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Adonai, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Has he done that? Indeed, he has. He has shown himself to be faithful to do exactly what he said he would do. He says, I will take you to myself as a people, and I will be your God. You will know that I am your God who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, and give it to you as an inheritance. I am Adonai. And so here's my question. Is the first generation didn't make it, except for Joshua and Caleb. In terms of the adults, they didn't make it. There were those who violated, who failed to trust him continually. And so they didn't get to go into the land. Does that make God's promises here untrue? No, his promises are to Israel, to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet individuals within that chosen group don't go into the land because they don't trust and obey. Because those individuals don't go doesn't mean God's promises to Israel as a whole are void or null. Null and void, I guess, is the better way to say that. So when Aaron's first two sons, Nadab and Abihu, they die, they're struck down by God, right? They are sons of Israel. Nadab is the next high priest. He continued to be, he was a son of Israel, son of Aaron. When God struck them, did that mean that now he was done with Israel? No. When the Exodus generation didn't get to go into the land, was God done with Israel? No. He was not. He is true to his promises. And so he, through a remnant, keeps his promises. The Lord tells in the Torah, he tells them, look, he knows, he sees the continual trajectory and the rejection on their unfaithfulness. But he doesn't wipe them out, doesn't give up, doesn't say, you know what, this is hopeless and useless. He's going to continue. He's going to continue. He's going to continue. We would think, man, God's a slow learner. God is faithful. He's not a slow learner. He knows, he sees our weaknesses, and yet he knows what we're able to do if we'll trust him. If we'll put our trust in him. He knows what he made us to do, what he's called us to do, if we'll put our trust in him. But we're not puppets on a string. He wants us in cooperation with him. So when that first generation does not complete what they were called to do, the consequence of their choices, they die in the desert. But God's purposes aren't done. And so he tells that generation in Leviticus, says, when he's going through all these things and talk about the possible judgments, he says, yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I hate them into utter destruction and break my covenant with them, for I am Adonai their God. But for their sake, I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am Adonai. This covenant is not meaningless to him. He has tied himself to his people, and he has not forgotten the promises he's made, and he will not forget. He says, if his sons forsake my Torah and do not walk in my judgments, this is in Psalm 89, speaking of David, when he makes the covenant with David. If his sons forsake my Torah and don't walk in my judgments, if they violate my decrees and don't keep my commands, my mitzvot, then I will punish their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with flogging, but I will not withdraw my chesed, my loving kindness from David, nor will I betray my faithfulness. I will not violate my covenant, nor alter what my lips have uttered. Once for all, I have sworn by my holiness, but I am one of a kind, he says. I will not lie to David. His descendants will endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me, and as the moon established forever, and a trustworthy witness of the sky. So he appeals to the heavens and the earth. So here the Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and he is relentlessly resilient. When Hosea describes, when Hosea is called to experience on some level what God has experienced in the unfaithfulness of those on the other side of his covenant, of his bride, we get a picture of just how much God humbles himself, lowers himself to us, and his people continually reject him. And yet what kind of love and faithfulness and humbling will he come in and actually take our injustice upon himself in order to make us clean and free. In Isaiah 54, he says, for a brief moment I deserted you, he says to Israel, but I will regather you with great compassion. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting chesed, everlasting love, I will have compassion on you, says Adonai, your Redeemer. For this is like the waters of Noah to me, as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more cover the earth. So I have sworn I will not be angry with you, nor will I rebuke you. Though the mountains depart and the hills be shaken, my love will not depart from you, nor will my covenant of peace be shaken, says Adonai, who has compassion on you. Afflicted one, storm-tossed, unconsoled, behold, I set your stones in antimony, lay your foundations with sapphires, make your pinnacles of rubies, your gates of crystal, and all your walls of precious stones. All your children will be taught by Adonai. Your children will have great shalom. The Lord continues to reiterate his promises to his people. This covenant that he makes with his people to this first generation of the Exodus, the first generation following the Exodus generation. Then generations later, he's still declaring his faithfulness to his people, still declaring his faithfulness to Israel. And even to this day, though most of Israel is not walking in faithfulness to the God of Israel, have not submitted themselves to his chosen king, his Mashiach. God has, while individuals face the consequences, there's a remnant, and God continually keeps his purposes for Israel at work, and his desire is that all Israel will be saved. We read in Jeremiah 33, verse 17, for thus says Adonai, for David there will not be cut off a man sitting on the throne of the house of Israel, nor will the Levitical priests, Kohanim, ever lack a man before me to offer burnt offering, to burn grain offerings, and to make sacrifices continually. Verse 19, and the word of Adonai came to Jeremiah, saying, thus says Adonai, if you can break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that day and night would not be at their appointed time, only then may my covenant be broken with my servant David, that he would not have a son to reign on his throne, and the Levitical Kohanim would not be my ministers. You know, those final promises in this covenant relationship with those promises he makes there, apart from Yeshua, in Yeshua they're fulfilled, but apart from him, they're hard to explain, because there hasn't been a son of David on the throne of Israel for millennia apart from Yeshua. Right? And we've talked about this in the past. There are no sacrifices being offered. Here it says the priest will be offering, right? The Levitical Kohanim will not lack a man before me to offer burnt offering, grain offerings, and to make sacrifices continually. How is that possible? Right? But in Yeshua, who is the great high priest, he is the once and for all sacrifice, and he ever lives to make intercession for us, so that that the sacrifices are fulfilled in him. In him, all God's promises are fulfilled, and they are true, right? They are yes and amen. They are yes, and they are true, faithful. His covenant is true. His call for Israel remains. Just because individuals, and many individuals, right? A whole generation, the Exodus generation, hundreds of thousands, only 2 got to go. 650,000, and a remnant of 2 crossed into the land. God was still faithful to his covenant, because his gifts and his call, Romans 11:29 says, are irrevocable. Right? He loves Israel, and he is calling Israel today to submit to him, to submit to his love, to trust him, to turn to him, to submit to his love that's fulfilled in Emmanuel, God with us, right? The one that Isaiah 9 says that the one will be born. He's born, and he's called Wonderful, which is a word that's used for God, Wonderful Counselor. He's born. A child is born, and he's called El Gibor, Mighty God. Like, what king is allowed to be called El Gibor, Mighty God? He is born, and he's called Aviad, Everlasting Father, Father of Eternity. What king of Israel would it not be considered idolatry? Would they go, wait, you don't get to call Hezekiah Mighty God. You don't get to call Hezekiah Everlasting Father. And yet Isaiah prophesies of a king that will be born, that will be called, he's Prince of Peace, fulfilled in Yeshua. And so here Moses On the banks of the Jordan is renew, or not quite at the banks of the Jordan, they're going on the banks of the Jordan, is renewing the call to to this generation that's entering the land. And the Lord is renewing the call now to a generation today. You say, well, the other generations, but there's a generation, there's a day coming, there's a generation that will awaken. God's plans for Israel are not done. God is calling us to make Yeshua known to Israel and to the nations, that they would turn to him and call on him. Those who suggest that God has rejected Israel, they don't understand. Right? Again, God deals in judgment with individuals, and yet his faithfulness is true. Election, right? The chosenness of Israel, they were chosen, and yet many of them didn't cross into the promised land. So his chosenness for the group doesn't mean all individuals then just because of their lineage get to cross over. They have to walk in faithfulness to the Lord, right? Did God judging these that didn't get to cross in? Does that mean he was rejecting his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No. And when the Exodus generation, -2, died in the desert, had God abandoned his promises? No, never. And today, most of Israel still fail to trust in him, but God has not abandoned his promises. He has given us a covenant that outlives our failures, his faithfulness, his truth. And he has given us, and it's fulfilled in Yeshua, who has given us a new covenant. As Jeremiah 31 talks about, I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not like the one I made with their fathers. I want to write my law on their hearts. And that's the covenant he's made with us, and he wants us to respond to. Amen? All right. Well, I know I've gone long, as usual, but only one Torah portion this week. We'll be back in 1 Peter tomorrow. And then, of course, don't forget on Shabbat to join us at 10:30 Arizona time for our Shabbat service. All right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for joining us for Daily Manna today. May the work that the Holy Spirit has stirred in your heart today overflow from you to the lives of those you encounter. May Yeshua's love bubble forth from you to your family and your friends and your co-workers, even and especially the people who might be unkind to you. Let's be life-giving water bottles in the land that is dry and weary, where there has been no water. Please don't forget to download our Shalom AZ app on your phone or streaming device. It's the easiest way to watch services, access devotionals, and share teachings with friends and family. Just search Shalom AZ in your app store. And don't forget to mark your calendars for our next gathering on Saturday, August 16th at 5 p.m. at the Chapel of Nelson University AIC in Phoenix. We look forward to seeing you there. And again, if you've been blessed by Shalom AZ Ministries but haven't yet taken that step to give, would you prayerfully consider sowing into what God is doing here? Your giving is instrumental, helping us live stream services, create devotionals, and reach people who are hungry for truth and hope. As you give, you're not only meeting needs, you are partnering with the Lord to give life and transformation to countless hearts. We're grateful that as you give to him, you're entrusting Shalom AZ Ministries to be faithful stewards of your worship and giving. Again, the easiest way to give is through our app or online at shalomaz.com/give. You can also mail a check to our P.O. Box. And remember, please join us for Daily Manna, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Arizona time. If you can't join us live, that's okay. The food is still hot and ready for you. Together, let's be built on the richness of God's Word at work in our lives by the power of His Spirit. Thanks again for being here. Let's let Yeshua have His way in us as we go forward to serve Him wholeheartedly. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.